Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Good Wednesday, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. It is now March, and meteorologically we would say welcome to spring. For many in Alaska, that doesn't quite add up most of the time. Of course, there are only two real seasons in Alaska, right? July and winter, right? As always, you can check your seasonal forecast, or at least the forecast for today during the season you're in, at 800-472-0391. You can find us online at weather.gov/Alaska, and we'll pause here quickly to remind you that today is the day where that web address change is happening. So if your bookmark reads something like pafc.arh.noaa.gov, that might not work anymore. So if you're going to your favorite weather bookmark for the Weather Service and it doesn't work, type in weather.gov/Alaska or change this to /Anchorage/Fairbanks/Juneau. If you want to get to the Aviation Weather Unit, that page should still be the same, but you can get started early, weather.gov/AAWU. Or, if you want to check out the tsunami alert, anything like that that's happening, you feel a shake and you want to check, you can check that out anytime. We did just have an earthquake about 40 miles west of Homer, around 5:15 on Wednesday. That was about 5.5. No tsunami issue with that, according to the National Weather Service Tsunami Center there in Palmer. So good news there. nws.ar.tvweather@noaa.gov, an easy way to email us and allow us to help you find what you're looking for if it's not easily available online. Snow forecast time. Here's a look at the Panhandle, and if you're in Southeast, it's probably been snowing where you are by this point, and it's probably going to continue to snow where you are as we head into Thursday and probably at least into Friday, especially for the central Panhandle and maybe up north. Down south across places like Ketchikan and Annette, we're going to see some changes back and forth to rain and then snow and maybe some rain, and there's also an opportunity for some thunder and lightning out here across the central Gulf as the storm spins up. In the meantime, our friends around Hyder are looking at about 8 to 12 inches of snow there around the central Panhandle. 3 to 7 inches of snow, places like Angoon experiencing those amounts. Around the Juneau region, 4 to 8 inches of snow. And as you get into the northern Panhandle, Glacier Bay, up around Haines and Skagway, probably closer toward 3 to 10 inches of snow. You're going to get some snow, and it is going to continue there. We've got winter storm warnings out, including places around Juneau, out across the northern Panhandle, winter weather advisories through the central Panhandle and down toward Hyder. Again, even though your amounts are higher, you can probably handle, or at least you're a little more used to, those levels of snow. A look out toward the Valdez area shows a high wind warning. For regions around the Thompson Pass area, expecting those gusts to pick up as we head through tonight and tomorrow. And across the Alaska range, a winter weather advisory for blowing snow. As the winds are moving through those passes, their visibility may drop off. And as we get up north, also winter weather advisories there for a reduction in visibility thanks to blowing snow. East of Dead Horse and then all the way out toward the eastern Beaufort Seacoast, we have a winter weather advisory for blowing snow, and not to mention dangerous wind chills here down to about 50 to 55 below, but also blizzard conditions. The blizzard warning continues for the eastern Beaufort Seacoast now through tonight all the way until about Friday midnight. So as we head into Saturday, that's when at this point we expect those conditions to potentially improve. However, the overall weather pattern really isn't going to change very much, so don't be surprised if we continue under strong wind conditions there very low wind chills, and poor visibility, basically blizzard conditions there. On top of this, you may actually see another couple inches of snow. So 2 inches of snow around the eastern Beaufort Seacoast there. The worst conditions start to pick up east of Dead Horse, but the really bad stuff out here across the eastern Beaufort Seacoast itself. So west, things gradually improve. Also wind chill advisories there for the Chukchi Coast. So cold, wind, snowy, still wintertime, even if the calendar says meteorological spring. Wind chill forecast, yeah, look at this. This takes us all the way into Friday and Saturday there. So this is kind of the lowest point set on the map. Don't have to worry about southeast too much for the wind chills, but look at the interior. As we get into tomorrow, Fairbanks could be looking at wind chills from 40 to 50 below. Arctic Village to Bettles, 43 to 58 below. The North Slope, anywhere from 45 to 55 below. There's a lot of cold out there. There's a lot of wind too. So you put all that together and you're getting wind chills all the way across the west coast that are 20 to 30 below into the Kotzebue Sound region and Nome and the southwest coast. Bethel looking at a wind chill as worse as 25 below as we get into the next several days. So be prepared for the cold to last and see, I'm thinking cold, my lips are locking up. Be prepared for the cold to, kind of get through your clothes a little bit too. So just if you got to go out, make sure you're ready for it and make sure you know where people are coming and going. Here's a look at the satellite picture, and keep your eye on this swirl right here. This is the low pressure system, at least part of it, that's really churning things up for southeast. Put this in motion, you can see the convective clouds bubbling up around it. That's pulling back, and it's pulling in a new weather system across the eastern Gulf. As that continues, it's bringing in warm and wet air, feeding into southeast, and really starting to focus that snow across the central panhandle. This will continue blowing up a little bit more across parts of the panhandle as we go through the next several days. Out west, watch as high pressure pushes these clouds out and away from the interior. Keep your eye on this spot here and then watch what the clouds are doing around it. I'll get out of the way. Look at that. It's just kind of a force field of weather. It's really what it is. High pressure is keeping all of this from moving into the interior, so we get the cold winds working down the west coast and the cold winds working across the north slope, and the cold just settles in here and clears away across the interior. Now, that said, if you're a Northern Lights hunter, a chaser of the light, maybe tonight, the next couple nights will be okay for you, because there has been some extra bursts from the sun today. I've been getting alerts about that all day long at work, so keep your eyes on the sky. Maybe the next several nights will be in your favor if you're ready with your camera or just want to check it out in the middle of the night. So what we're focused on as far as active weather goes for snow: southeast, cold and wind across the west, and blizzard conditions across the north. Everywhere else just dealing with the cold for right now. High pressure across the interior is over 1,030 millibars, stretching through the Yukon Valley and all the way out to the west at about 1,043 millibars there. You had snow in St. Lawrence Island, some light and passing snow showers, kind of hit and miss, on and off again across the Bering Sea coast, generally the Alaska Peninsula. And then low pressure stretching snow all the way from southeast into the central and northern Gulf, but not really reaching south central Alaska. Warmer air is moving northward. We've got snow across southeast, and we've got this weather system out here just across the North Pacific. That high pressure is keeping that at bay. It will not let this move eastward at this time, so it's going to keep this weather system focused on the west and west central parts of the chain. Through tonight, a generally clear sky across a large part of the interior, southwest and west coast. Some snow showers along the Brooks Range and north, and this tight pressure gradient ensures that we'll have blowing snow and poor visibility, not to mention additional snow, so blizzard conditions look to be a fairly sure thing up across the central and eastern Beaufort Seacoast, a lot more so on the eastern Beaufort Seacoast, so be careful there. High pressure just offshore of Sitka and outside of Cross Sound has been creating storm force conditions in Cross Sound today. And you can see that warm and wet air still trying to sneak its way up into the southern panhandle, so don't be surprised if you get some rain in Ketchikan and Metlakatla. And then just south of that, it's going to flip right back around as the storm system moves eastward a little bit. So the cold air will wrap back around and you can get back into snow as we get into Thursday. But there may be times where that goes back and forth for you. Now, as the cold air sets up, there's that possibility. Again, places like Hyder pick up 8 to 12 inches of snow, some in the central interior, about 3 to 7. And that could certainly wrap its way into Juneau as well. A good half foot of snow on top of what you've seen, certainly possible. Now, the north side of this is the colder and drier storm. So if you're in Prince William Sound and you're in some of those favored gaps and passes there, and you know which ones we're talking about, around Thompson Pass, that's going to be a pretty windy situation for you. The Copper River Delta region, probably going to be more than breezy for the next several days. And many in the Matanuska Valley have already experienced that. We saw gusts today peaking between 35 and about 55 miles per hour, and that was just mid to late morning. And overnight, again, wouldn't be surprised to see those winds come up for some of you. Across the gaps and passes there of the Alaska Peninsula, looks like a windy situation for you. And up north, not a whole lot's changed as we get into Thursday. More snow, more wind, and certainly some bone-chilling cold there with wind chill values 55 below in some cases. On Friday, there's even a new surge of colder air working its way southward. We'll see how far south that gets. A lot of this weather pattern is going to try and move eastward. But high pressure sitting across the interior, still staying in place across the middle Tanana Valley and eastward and westward into the Bering. You'll notice that weather maker out across the chain is working northward, not eastward, because high pressure is rotating this around in a clockwise fashion that draws up that southerly flow. It means rain for many across AKwx and then westward toward Kiska. And then it'll send that weather maker further west toward Russia. In the meantime, this system across the eastern Gulf is kind of getting mixed up there, finally pulling in colder air to all parts of southeast. There's a chance that we might have some more convection or upward moving air that creates showers and thunderstorms out over the water. We'll see if this changes course just a little bit. That could bring that closer to southeast, but right now most of that seems to be centered a little bit more offshore. And as far as this moving southward goes, that means a better chance for more wind, stronger winds for places like the Lynn Canal. So if you're in Haines and Skagway and even Juneau, keep your eye on this pressure gradient. That could start to really bring the winds up even more for you as we get toward the end of the week. So a lot going on for southeast, certainly up north, and just, again, cold and clear for many parts of mainland Alaska going forward. Here's a look at temps today. 30s for most in southeast. Juneau was up to about 34, Sitka 36, Ketchikan in the mid-30s, Hyder was 30 degrees, Cordova 26. If you're in Valdez, it was 19 and breezy today. 4 around Golcana. Anchorage saw 18, 23 in Homer, again with a shake just 40 miles west of you around 5:15 today. That was about 5.5 again, and 6 in Fairbanks with 2 below up in Eagle. Northward we go, and Prudhoe Bay and Dead Horse was about 10 below today, 4 below in Kaktovik, anywhere from 5 to 10 below around Barrow, all the way out toward Atkasuk. Kivalina, 14 below for you. Kotzebue, 10 degrees warmer though. That was probably noticeable. 4 above in Nome, and then as you get out toward Galena, it was 8, 12 in McGrath, 6 in Bethel. St. Lawrence Island, our friends out there in Campbell, 19 degrees. Around King Salmon and Dillingham, low teens for you. Lake Iliamna was 13 degrees, low to mid-20s for the Pribilofs. About the same there for most of the Alaska Peninsula. Sandpoint was 23, Dutch Harbor and Unalaska 27, and mid-30s for the central and western chain. Here's your overnight lows. It's going to be cold, right? 25 to 35 below for actual temperature values, not the wind chill, for Fort Yukon, Fairbanks, McGrath, out toward Ambler and Bettles. Teens and 20s below 0 for the North Slope, and when you factor in the wind, that goes to about 50 to 55 below on the extreme side. Southwest, you're looking at 0 to 15 below the Alaska Peninsula. Teens and 20s, 19 in St. Paul, about freezing for Adak and Atka, Shemya 36, and southeast in the 20s and 30s with Haines and Skagway in the teens, up to 20 for a high tomorrow. Holding just below freezing for most of the central Panhandle and northward, Sitka and southward above freezing, but just barely. 20s for Prince William Sound, teens for the Cook Inlet region, 25 in Kodiak, teens for Bristol Bay, most of the peninsula around Port Hayden, all the way southward. You're looking at about 20s to low 30s, 35 in Dutch Harbor and Unalaska. Let's see, about Amonic, about 10 degrees for you. Bethel near 9, 4 in McGrath, 0 in Galena, 8 in Nome. Most of the North Slope 5 to as cold as 15 below. Don't forget about that wind chill again tomorrow. And 11 below for Fort Yukon with 3 below in Fairbanks. Flying weather now shows IFR conditions continuing for the North Slope. No surprise there with the wind and the snow that's falling, also across the west and parts of southeastern Alaska. We'll see some of that change a little bit and push up against the mountains during the afternoon, but count on at least MVFR also for the Alaska Range and parts of the northern Yukon Delta all the way out towards St. Lawrence Island. IFR continuing for the Beaufort Seacoast through the afternoon. Count on IFR through a good part of Anaktuvik and Adigan Pass tomorrow. Not such a great day to fly, especially once you get north of the passes. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass, VFR. Rainy Pass leans over toward MVFR as the day goes on. Windy Pass, we expect to see marginal conditions developing there. Isabel Pass looks to be on the eastern fringe of the OK side. And Mentasta Pass lingering at MVFR through most of the day. Conditions kind of worsen as you head east. And Tanita Pass, VFR conditions there, but it will be windy. Portage Pass, VFR conditions through most of the day. Also some chop, obviously. And IFR conditions at least for Chilkoot and White Pass to start. Maybe some improvements as the day goes on. Freezing levels show that cold air is retreating out across the west, but here's our warm and wet air working its way into the weather maker for southeast. So then here's our low pressure system. No surprise you see 2,000 and 4,000 foot levels there, but the cold air certainly diving southward on the backside of that weather system out over the Gulf. Icing potential will linger across southeast for the coming days, above 4,000 feet for tomorrow. Most of that light to isolated moderate. We've also got a kind of a trough that's pulling in moisture here across the west, aloft above 2,000 feet. So some light to isolated moderate there, and this is wrapping into the low pressure system out across the north and west Pacific, generally above 8,000 feet. Much warmer weather out there. Elsewhere, no major significant concerns. Tomorrow's jet stream has two areas of low pressure, one across the eastern Gulf, and then we have this blocking ridge of high pressure. Again, you've seen this pattern before, and low pressure out across the northwest Pacific, with wind speeds there at a greater rate, 100 to 110 knots. But really most of the very active weather is still skirting Alaska and staying well to our south. Here's where the cold's coming from, that due northerly flow, pushing that southward and allowing that to drop into the next band of fast-moving winds across the west coast. So that's keeping Alaska fed with a mighty wind of cold air. Low pressure across the northern Gulf, anywhere from 25 to 40 knots there. Here's our northerly flow at 9,000 feet, whipping down the west coast, 40 to 50 knots. High pressure still across the northern Bering. The northerlies coming over St. Lawrence Island and becoming more easterly as they run into the Aleutians, 35 to 40 knots there. And southerlies working their way into southeast, of course, 30 to 45 knots. 3,000 feet. Low pressure is a little bit further eastward, so we have a very broad northerly flow for most of mainland Alaska, 10 to as strong as 40 knots for many, 50 knots over Bristol Bay, north and westerly winds over Kodiak Island. High pressure trying to slow things down, not doing such a hot job here at 3,000 feet. 35 knots for St. Matthew, and then across the central and western chain, you can see the air moving in from the south. Helping to keep that rain chance going there. Turbulence, you betcha, across southeast. I would count on at least widespread moderate throughout the day, maybe reaching isolated severe. That'll be below 4,000 feet. We'll watch for occasional moderate for southwest and a large part of the peninsula, Kodiak Island and Prince William Sound, and across the western and south-facing slopes and passes around the Brooks Range, St. Lawrence Island and the western chain, and at least isolated moderate from time to time across the eastern Beaufort Seacoast. Of course, you're not going to be able to see very much, so that's going to be a little bit of tricky flying. That's a look at your aviation forecast. I'll be back in just a few minutes with an Ice Edge update as well as your marine weather. Stay tuned.
After about a half-century of human spaceflight, radiation detection and predicting space weather events is still not an exact science. Unfortunately, we cannot accurately determine when large particle ejections, called coronal mass ejections, or CMEs, will occur. A large CME can contain billions of tons of matter that can be accelerated to several million miles per hour. At these speeds, particles can reach Earth in a very short period of time. When the particles reach us, they collide with our magnetosphere and create auroras over the polar regions. Although beautiful to watch, the events which lead to this phenomenon can be very damaging and dangerous to astronauts outside the protection of the magnetosphere. In fact, between the Apollo 16 and Apollo 17 moon missions, a large solar particle event occurred. If astronauts had been in space during the event, the doses of radiation they would have been exposed to could have produced severe health effects within a short time. This is one of the main reasons better radiation prediction and monitoring are a focus of study.
How much time do you have to predict solar flares?
Well, it's actually very difficult to predict space weather. Just as we have a very hard time predicting hurricanes and tornadoes here on Earth, it's very difficult to predict when a solar flare is going to happen. A lot of solar physicists around the world are working on that problem, but right now we don't take action with the crew until we measure an increase in radiation. We are looking at trying to predict when there's an all-clear period. That'll allow us perhaps to do an EVA on the surface of the moon when we know there's a 90% chance we won't have a bad solar flare within the next 2 days. Yeah, the sun has an 11-year cycle, and every 11 years it goes from solar minimum, 5.5 years later solar maximum, and then back to solar minimum again. During solar minimum, there are very few sunspots, if any, and thus no solar flares. All the solar flares and solar particle events come out of the sunspots. During solar maximum, we have a lot of activity going on with the sun, and we have a lot of solar particle events. So during solar maximum, we're very active in mission control, trying to keep the crew from getting too much radiation from those events.
Is there a difference in the sources of radiation in space?
There actually is. From solar particle events, we can protect the crew from that type of radiation. From the galactic cosmic radiation, it's very heavy ions, high energy types of particles that we cannot shield against. It would take too much shielding and is cost prohibitive to put that much mass up there. And the reason we try to keep the crew's dose as low as reasonably achievable is because any increase in dose is directly proportional to an increase in the probability that they'll get a fatal cancer. And unlike many of the risks that astronauts are exposed to, and there are many, radiation is one of the few risks that they will carry with them the rest of their life.
Do you think our predictive models will change dramatically for future missions?
Okay, actually, I think they will get better. I believe that all of the science that's being done by all the solar physicists and the space physicists is going to lead to better predictive models. They're doing a lot of great work. They are launching a lot of new missions, and those missions are there to explicitly study the types of physics that will lead to these better models. As we prepare to go back to the moon and Mars, our team here at SRAG is extremely excited to be a part of that effort of keeping astronauts safe. For me and my team to be standing over in mission control when we step foot on the moon again would be one of the greatest achievements of my lifetime.
Space radiation is not typically harmful to us on Earth because the Earth's magnetic field extends thousands of miles out into space, helping shield us from the dangerous particles. Did you know that some astronauts from the Apollo mission through today have reported actually seeing radiation as flashes in their eyes? The flash the astronauts experience is space radiation zipping through their eyes like subatomic bullets. When the radiation strikes the retina, it triggers a false signal that the brain interprets as a flash of light. This is problematic because this radiation kills brain cells and also can trigger long-term problems such as cataracts, which is a clouding of the lens that focuses light on the retina. Research is now underway to help develop probes that can detect signs of cataracts in humans years before they become visible. Eventually, astronauts might carry such a probe with them on space missions, checking their eyes as they go.
Here's a look at today's sea ice edge, and with the northerly flow coming down the west coast and the cold air, no surprise that the ice edge is advancing south and towards St. Paul. But again, as of yesterday, we don't think that the ice edge will actually reach St. Paul now this season. You can see the ice has expanded a little bit more across Bristol Bay, but with the changing weather out across the west, a lot of that warm air will stay focused on the west rather than across the west coast. So we still think this is going to be building southward, and you can see increased concentrations across northern and central parts of Cook Inlet. Here's a look at southeast. The wind's going to be a big factor in your forecast for the next several days, not to mention the snow that's falling. But across the Lynn Canal, 35 knots with a 7-foot sea. Freezing spray will be an issue there, and then stronger gusts out across the northern outer coast. From the south, 45 knots outside of Cross Sound. Northeasterlies outside of Icy Cape and Cape Fairweather, 45 knots with a 10-foot sea. Southerlies coming up, 25 knots on the central and southern inner channels, and then southwesterlies along the outer coast with 14-foot seas. As we get into Friday, winds are still strong up north. Northerlies, 45 knots all the way down to Stevens Passage, 35 knots there. Southeasterlies in Clarence Strait at 30 knots, and we keep 40-knot winds across the northern outer coast. 11-foot seas up north, 13-foot seas outside of Cross Sound, south of Sitka, 20 knots from the southeast with a 14-foot sea. Across south central, northerlies for Prince William Sound and across the north and western Gulf. The higher winds will be around the Barren Islands, northwesterly to northerly winds as you move into the Gulf. 17-foot seas there with higher gusts. Northerlies through Cook Inlet, 20 knots. 4-foot sea as you head down into the open water. Northeasterlies across the ice on Friday, 25 knots. North and northwesterlies as you get down toward the Barrens, and then stronger winds, of course, outside the Barrens and east of Kodiak Island at 45 knots. Inside of Prince William Sound, 30 knots with a 6-foot sea, and higher gusts, especially around the Copper River Delta region, so be prepared for that. Around the Alaska Peninsula and Bristol Bay, northwesterlies inside the bay, 7-foot seas there in open waters. Northerlies down the Bering Sea coast, 35 to 45 knots across the Pacific coast, 10 to 15-foot seas, and watching for freezing spray both Thursday and Friday. Northerlies continue across the Bering Sea coast, 20 to 25, 30 to 45 knots. The stronger winds, of course, from Castle Cape to Chignik, with that being more gusty through those gaps and passes there. 15-foot seas on Friday in that region. Across the Aleutians, northerlies for Unalaska to Nikolsky, 20 to 25, 6 to 7 foot seas across the east. Easterlies for the central and western coast, 20 to 35 knot winds. With 15 to 16 foot seas across the western chain. As we get into Friday, you're looking at south and southeasterlies for Adak and Atka, 40 knots there, 13 foot seas on the Bering Sea coast, 20 on the Pacific, and east and southeasterly winds developing from Unalaska to Nikolsky with 20 to 30 knot winds on Friday. For the west coast, the ice keeping things cold for the west coast. That northwesterly flow over that will make that a sharp wind, 20 to 25 knots up north. Northerlies across the Kuskokwim Delta region, watching for freezing spray just south of that edge. Westerlies over St. Matthew, 4 foot seas in the open waters, and also for St. Paul and St. George on a 15-knot wind. That becomes more light and variable as we get into Friday. Northerlies coming down through the Kuskokwim Delta, 4 foot seas expected there in the open waters. Westerlies for St. Lawrence Island, and more of a light and variable wind north of Nunivak Island with southwesterlies across St. Matthew, 15 knots with a 3 foot sea, and again freezing spray in the region. Thursday, we're expecting westerlies for most of the north coast. The strongest winds from Prudhoe Bay to Kaktovik, 30 to 35. Northwesterlies blowing into Kotzebue Sound, though, 15 to 20 knots there. As we get into Friday, that becomes a southwesterly wind, so focusing the wind toward Point Hope and Kivalina and Kotzebue. Westerlies from Point Lay eastward all the way to Kaktovik. Notice how these winds stay up. That means harsh and sharp conditions for you as we go through the end of the week. Remember, a blizzard warning is in effect. Tonight's forecast includes a couple inches of snow for the region, poor visibility, and wind chills down to about 55 below. Winter weather advisories continue for the Brooks Range, and winter weather advisories and winter storm warnings are in effect for a large part of southeastern Alaska, where snow will continue to fall, as you see here. Periods of blowing snow and sharp winds there for places like Valdez and the Thompson Pass area, and probably the Matanuska Valley as well as we go forward. A look for sharp wind conditions across the west coast, and that will keep conditions very uncomfortable with dangerous wind chills mostly focused on the Alaska Range as well as the Brooks Range and the North Slope. Thanks for watching Alaska Weather.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.